Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists no greater tragedy than the fall of the perfect. Among the 20 Space Marine legions created by the Emperor of Mankind to conquer the galaxy, none fell further from grace than the Third Legion. Once known as paragons of excellence, bearers of the Emperor's own standard, they would become something so utterly depraved that their very name serves as mockery of everything they once represented. This is the story of the Emperor's children, and how the pursuit of perfection led to the embrace of absolute corruption, the pinnacle of perfection. Picture, if you will, the halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra during the Great Crusade. Among the countless warriors who served the Emperor's vision of galactic unity, one legion stood apart. They moved with practiced grace. Oh, their purple and gold armor, polished to mirror brilliance. Every movement, every word, every action was calculated for maximum effectiveness and aesthetic beauty. These were the Emperor's children, and they alone bore a privilege granted to no other legion during that golden age. Upon their breastplates, worked in finest gold, they wore the Palatine Aquila, the Emperor's personal standard, the double-headed eagle that represented his direct authority. This was no small honor. While other legions bore their own heraldry with pride, only the Third Legion could display the symbol that marked them as the Emperor's own chosen warriors. How did they earn this unprecedented honor? The answer lies in a battle known as the Proximan Rebellion. Early in the Great Crusade, when the Emperor still led his armies personally across the stars. When rebellious humans on Proxima threatened to derail the fledgling Imperium's expansion, the Third Legion stood as the Emperor's shield. They fought with such precision and dedication that they saved the Emperor himself from mortal peril. In recognition of their valor and perfection in battle, he granted them permission to bear his personal standard. From that moment forward, they were no longer simply the Third Legion. They became the Emperor's children, a name that carried both tremendous honor and crushing responsibility. But this honor was built upon foundations of near tragedy. The Third Legion's early history is marked by a catastrophe that nearly destroyed them before they could truly begin. During the expansion of the Space Marine legions, when gene forges on Luna were ramping up production to meet the demands of galactic conquest, disaster struck the Third. A plot by the Selena gene cults, those mysterious keepers of genetic secrets who had reluctantly submitted to imperial rule, corrupted nearly the entire gene seed stock of the Third Legion. This corruption manifested as a degenerative condition the apothecaries called the blight, a progressive cancer that caused random tumors in both bone and organ tissue. The blight spread through the Legion like wildfire through dry timber. Marines who had stood proud and perfect in the morning were dead by nightfall, their bodies ravaged by tumors that grew with terrifying speed. The apothecaries worked desperately to save their brothers, but for every Marine they saved, 3 more succumbed. The Third Legion watched itself die, Marine by Marine, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. At one point, the entire Legion numbered only 200 warriors. 200 when their brother legions counted tens of thousands. They stood on the precipice of extinction, and it was only through the heroic efforts of their apothecaries, particularly a young Gene Wright named Fabius, that they survived at all. This brush with annihilation left deep scars on the Legion's psyche. They had seen firsthand how fragile their existence was, how quickly perfection could crumble to dust. When they finally stabilized their gene seed and began recruiting again, they did so with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Every new recruit was scrutinized with intense precision. Every action, every drill, every battle was executed not just to the letter of doctrine, but beyond it. Yet they would prove, again and again, that they deserved to survive. They would show the Emperor that his faith in them, his granting of the Aquila, was justified. The warriors of the Third Legion came primarily from the noble houses of Europa, that ancient continent on Terra, where aristocratic bloodlines stretched back into the age of strife. After their defeat by the Emperor's Thunder Warriors during the Unification Wars, these noble houses offered their finest sons as tribute to the conqueror. It was a gesture of submission, yes, but also one of respect. The emperor did not simply take slaves or conscripts. He accepted only the best, the brightest, the most capable. The young men who became the first emperor's children were trained from birth in the arts of war, schooled in strategy and tactics, taught to lead and to command. Yet they brought with them the martial traditions of countless generations of warrior nobility. This aristocratic heritage shaped the legion's character in profound ways. Unlike other legions who recruited from hive gangs or feral world warriors, the Third drew from a culture that valued refinement alongside strength. They understood that victory was not simply about overwhelming force, but about applying force with precision and elegance. They studied not just how to kill, but how to kill beautifully, how to make war into an art form. This philosophy would serve them well during the Great Crusade and would later contribute to their spectacular fall. The Legion's early achievements. Before the discovery of their Primarch, the Third Legion compiled a record of achievement that would be the envy of many larger legions, as they understood something that many of their brother legions struggled to grasp. The Space Marines were not meant to fight alone. They were the tip of the spear, yes, but the shaft was the Imperial army, those countless millions of mortal soldiers who formed the backbone of Imperial conquest. While other legions viewed the army with disdain, considering them weak and unworthy of attention, the Third Legion embraced their role as leaders and coordinators. Take the Antarctic clearance campaign during the Unification Wars as an example. Official Imperial records credit this victory to Army Group Antilles, a formation of Imperial Army regulars. But any detailed analysis reveals the truth. The Third Legion crafted the strategy, developed the tactics, and led the execution. They didn't simply charge in and butcher the enemy, yet they assessed the situation, identified the enemy's weaknesses, and crafted a plan that leveraged the strengths of both Space Marines and mortal soldiers. The result was a crushing victory, achieved with minimal casualties. This pattern repeated itself again and again. The Bronze Host's conquest of Nadarin, the fifth raising of Jovsat II, countless campaigns where the Third Legion's contributions were downplayed in official records. They didn't seek glory for themselves. They sought perfection in execution, and they achieved it time and time again. Their tactical flexibility set them apart from more rigid legions, where some legions had preferred methods of war, drop assaults, or armored advances, or void combat. The Third excelled at everything. They studied every form of warfare, mastered every tactical doctrine, and could adapt on the fly when situations changed. If a planned orbital insertion became impossible, they seamlessly shifted to a ground assault. If air support was unavailable, they adjusted their tactics to compensate. This versatility made them invaluable to the early Imperium, and the Emperor recognized their worth by deploying them on diplomatic missions where other legions would have been too inflexible or brutal. The Third Legion served as the Emperor's heralds, arriving on worlds where the possibility of peaceful compliance still existed. They were the face of the Imperium, showing newly encountered human worlds what Imperial might and civilization could offer. They painted their armor in Imperial purple, emblazoned with the thunderbolt and sun symbols of Terra's authority. When they spoke with the Emperor's voice, and carrying his intent without deviation. Other legions bore the Emperor's words, but the Third embodied his will. They were his children in more than just name. Yet even in these early days, the seeds of what would become their greatest weakness were already present. Their pursuit of perfection was not simply about military excellence. It extended to aesthetics, to culture, to every aspect of their existence. They studied art and music alongside tactics and strategy. They held themselves to impossible standards in all things. Where another Marine might be satisfied with a clean kill, a warrior of the Third would seek the perfect kill, the one executed with maximum efficiency and minimum wasted motion. Where another legion might accept victory, the Third sought flawless victory, and achieved with style and grace that elevated warfare to an art form. This obsession with perfection would have been harmless in any other legion. But the Third Legion was not any other legion. They were the Emperor's children, bearers of his standard, representatives of his will. The pressure to live up to that honor, combined with their near extinction from the Blight, created a psychological environment where good was never good enough. They had to be perfect, always, in all things. And as any student of human nature knows, the pursuit of perfection, taken to its extreme, can become its own form of madness. Fulgrim, the Phoenician rises. The discovery of the Third Legion's Primarch changed everything, though not in the way anyone expected. Like all the Primarchs, Fulgrim had been scattered across the galaxy by the dark powers of chaos while still an infant. His gestation pod crashed on Chemos, a dying mining world in the far reaches of Imperial space. Chemos had once been a thriving colony during humanity's first diaspora among the stars, but the Age of Strife had cut it off from interstellar trade. Without the raw materials and foodstuffs it had imported, Chemos began a slow collapse. Its people struggled simply to survive, working their depleted mines to extract every last scrap of valuable ore, trading it through dangerous warp routes for the supplies they needed to stave off extinction. Into this world of desperate scarcity came a child unlike any other. The people who found Fulgrim's pod took him in, raised him, and watched in amazement as he grew with impossible speed. By the time he should have been learning to walk, he was speaking in complete sentences. By the time he should have been entering adolescence, he was leading work crews in the mines. His mind was as exceptional as his body. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge absorbs water, mastering every skill he encountered with effortless grace. More than that, he inspired others. When Fulgrim worked a mine shaft, productivity increased. When he led a negotiation for food imports, better deals were struck. When he suggested improvements to Chemos's infrastructure, efficiency skyrocketed. Fulgrim didn't just save Chemos, he transformed it. Under his leadership, the world went from the edge of extinction to stability and then to prosperity. He reorganized the entire planetary economy, maximizing the efficiency of every mine, every forge, every transport route. He negotiated trade agreements with neighboring systems that brought wealth flooding back to Chemos. He inspired the population to excellence, showing them through his own example that perfection was achievable if one only dedicated oneself fully to the task. By the time the Emperor's expeditionary fleets reached Chemos, they found not a dying backwater, but a thriving industrial world, all due to the efforts of one remarkable individual. The reunion between the Emperor and Fulgrim was, by all accounts, a moment of genuine warmth. The Emperor saw in his son everything he had hoped to create. Here was a Primarch who embodied not just martial prowess, but cultural refinement, not just strength, but wisdom, not just leadership, but inspiration. Fulgrim, for his part, he saw in the Emperor the ultimate expression of everything he had strived to become. If Fulgrim had achieved perfection on a planetary scale, the Emperor had done so across the entire galaxy. In the Emperor, Fulgrim saw his ultimate role model, the being he would spend the rest of his life trying to emulate. When Fulgrim took command of the Third Legion, he found a force of only 200 Marines. The losses from the Blight had been catastrophic, and recruitment had been slow and careful to avoid reintroducing the genetic flaw. Most Primarchs would have been disappointed, even angry, at being given such a small force. But Fulgrim saw opportunity. These 200 Marines had survived when thousands had died. They represented the absolute pinnacle of the Third Legion's genetic legacy, yet the strongest and most dedicated warriors who had endured trials that would have broken lesser men. And they already bore the name Emperor's Children, already wore the Aquila, already embodied the pursuit of perfection that Fulgrim himself valued above all else. His first address to his legion has been recorded in the Book of Primarchs, and his words set the tone for everything that followed. He told them they would spread the Emperor's wisdom across the galaxy, He reminded them that they were the Emperor's children, and that all who looked upon them would know this truth. And then he spoke the words that would become their curse as much as their creed. "Only by imperfection can we fail him," Fulgrim said. "We will not fail." The Legion began its slow but steady expansion. Fulgrim established the fortress monastery on Chemos, as drawing recruits from the world's strongest, bravest, and most intelligent youths. But the standards remained impossibly high. Where other legions might accept any candidate who survived the augmentation process, Fulgrim imposed additional tests. Recruits had to demonstrate not just physical capability, but mental acuity, not just courage, but grace, not just strength, but refinement. Many who would have made fine Space Marines in other legions were rejected by the Emperor's children for not meeting Fulgrim's exacting standards. The Legion grew, but slowly, always emphasizing quality over quantity. Under Fulgrim's leadership, the Emperor's children developed their distinctive tactical doctrine. They favored rapid assault, swift strikes that overwhelmed the enemy before they could mount effective resistance. They made extensive use of jet bikes and other high-speed vehicles, not just for their tactical effectiveness, but for the elegance and artistry they brought to warfare. A jet bike assault by the Emperor's children was a thing of terrible beauty, a coordinated dance of death that left enemies broken and demoralized. They studied their opponents meticulously, identifying weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. Victory was not just about killing the enemy, it was about defeating them so thoroughly, so perfectly, that resistance became unthinkable. The Legion formed close bonds with several of their brother legions during this period. Their closest relationship was with Ferrus Manus and the Iron Hands, a friendship that seems surprising given the two legions' different philosophies. Where the Emperor's children pursued aesthetic perfection, the Iron Hands valued functional efficiency. Where Fulgrim saw warfare as art, Ferrus saw it as science. Yet the two Primarchs found common ground in their shared dedication to their craft and their mutual respect for excellence. Fulgrim and Ferrus became close friends, so close that Fulgrim crafted a thunderhammer named Fireblade as a gift for Ferrus, while Ferrus forged a sword called Forgebreaker as a gift for Fulgrim. These weapons were more than simple armaments. They were expressions of brotherhood, symbols of a bond that seemed unbreakable. The Legion also maintained good relations with the Lunar Wolves, later sons of Horus, serving alongside them in numerous campaigns. Fulgrim and Horus developed a friendship built on mutual ambition and shared vision. Both saw themselves as exemplars of what the Imperium could become. Both sought to prove themselves worthy of the honors they had been granted. Both pushed their legions to achieve greater and greater heights of excellence. This friendship would prove crucial in the dark days to come, though not in any way that would bring honor to either Primarch's legacy. The campaign of Laeran, where perfection met corruption. The Emperor's children's greatest triumph would also be the beginning of their damnation. In the closing years of the Great Crusade, Fulgrim's 28th Expeditionary Fleet encountered a waterworld designated 28-3, though it would become known to history by its native name, Laeran. This oceanic world presented a unique challenge. Its continents had long since sunk beneath the waves as ice caps melted, and the native species, the Laer, had adapted by building their entire civilization on floating islands that drifted in the planet's atmosphere. The Laer were remarkable in many ways that the Emperor's children found fascinating, even disturbing. They were serpentine beings, reptilian in base form, but they had mastered genetic engineering to a degree that rivaled even the Emperor's own work. They had created multiple castes, each genetically designed for specific purposes. Warrior castes with enhanced muscle structure and reflexes. Worker castes with specialized organs for their assigned tasks. Leader castes with expanded neural capacity. The Laer had literally engineered perfection into their society, creating specialized forms for every function. To Fulgrim and his legion, this was both impressive and offensive. The Laer had achieved something similar to what the Emperor had done with the Space Marines, but they had done it without the guiding vision of the Imperial truth. They had reached for perfection through genetic manipulation rather than through discipline and training, and they had done so in service to something the Imperials could not yet identify, some Xenos philosophy or alien god that had guided their development. The campaign to conquer Lyran should have taken years. The Adeptus Administratum estimated at least a decade would be needed to subdue such an advanced civilization, especially one adapted to fight in and around water where space marine advantages would be minimized. The Leia possessed weapons and technology that matched or exceeded Imperial standards in many areas. Worse, their floating cities could be moved to avoid orbital bombardment. Their warriors were gene-crafted for perfection in combat. They had the home field advantage and the determination of a species fighting for survival. The Emperor's children conquered Lyran in 1 month. It was a feat of arms that stunned even their brother legions. Fulgrim's forces struck with unprecedented speed and violence, overwhelming the Leia through sheer tactical brilliance and relentless assault. They adapted to the oceanic environment, modified their equipment for submarine warfare, learned to fight on the swaying platforms of floating cities. When the Leia tried to retreat to their underwater strongholds, the Emperor's children followed them into the depths. When the Xenos attempted to flee into the upper atmosphere, jump-pack troops pursued them. There was no respite, no moment of safety. The Emperor's children pressed their attack until the Leia were completely annihilated. But this stunning victory came at a terrible cost. 700 Marines died in the fighting, with more than 4,000 wounded. For a legion that still numbered less than most of its brothers, these were catastrophic casualties, yet Fulgrim accepted them without hesitation. The perfection of the victory, the sheer impossible speed of the conquest, justified any sacrifice. The Emperor's children had proven once again that they were without peer, that no challenge was beyond their capabilities. In the aftermath of the conquest, as apothecaries tended to the wounded and chaplains honored the dead, Fulgrim led a force to clear the remaining Leia temples and strongholds. These were strange places, built with architecture that hurt human eyes to perceive, decorated with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed directly. The Leia had worshipped something, the Imperials realized, though they couldn't identify what. These temples were dedicated to some alien god or philosophy, filled with treasures and artifacts that spoke of ancient devotion. In one such temple, Fulgrim found a sword. It was a beautiful weapon, silver blade gleaming with an inner light, pommel wrapped in what looked like silk but felt like living skin. The weapon called to him in a way he couldn't explain. It felt right in his hand, perfectly balanced, an extension of his own will. He claimed it as a trophy of the conquest, never suspecting that this simple act would doom not just himself, but his entire legion. The sword contained a demon of Slanesh, as the chaos god of excess and sensation, and from the moment Fulgrim touched it, the demon began its insidious work. The corruption did not happen overnight. Demons are patient, especially those in service to the Prince of Pleasure. The entity within the sword began with whispers, thoughts that seemed like Fulgrim's own, but carried subtle poison. Thoughts about how the Emperor's standards might be too limited. Wonderings about whether perfection truly required such rigid adherence to Imperial doctrine. Questions about whether there might be other paths to excellence, paths that the Emperor in his vast vision had perhaps overlooked. Fulgrim dismissed these thoughts at first. He was loyal to the Emperor beyond question. He had dedicated his life to embodying the Imperial vision. But the demon was clever. It didn't suggest betrayal, and it suggested improvement. It played on Fulgrim's greatest strength and greatest weakness, his desire to be perfect. Wouldn't a truly perfect being be able to consider all possibilities? Wouldn't ultimate perfection require examining even forbidden knowledge, if only to understand why it was forbidden? The demon wove its influence through these questions, slowly eroding Fulgrim's certainty without him even realizing it was happening. The Leia campaign had another corrupting influence beyond the demon blade. Chief Apothecary Fabius, the same gene wright who had helped save the Legion from the Blight, became fascinated by the Leia's genetic engineering. Here was a species that had achieved biological perfection through science rather than training. They had literally designed themselves for excellence in every field. Fabius began collecting Leia genetic samples, studying their techniques, wondering if these Xenos methods could be adapted to further enhance the Space Marines. It was research conducted with the best of intentions, a desire to make the Legion even more perfect. But it was also the beginning of something far darker. Fabius approached Fulgrim with a proposal. What the Emperor had created in the Space Marines was incredible, beyond question. But what if it was only the first step? What if there were ways to improve upon the Emperor's design, to push the Space Marines beyond even their current capabilities? The gene seed was a marvel, yes, but perhaps it could be enhanced further. Perhaps the implanted organs could be modified for greater efficiency. Perhaps there were genetic structures in humanity itself that could be activated or enhanced to create something even greater than a Space Marine. In any other Legion, at any other time, this proposal would have been rejected instantly. To suggest that the Emperor's work was incomplete, that it needed improvement, was borderline heresy. The Primarchs were the Emperor's greatest achievements, and the Space Marines were created from their gene seed. To tamper with that legacy was to question the Emperor's wisdom and skill. But Fulgrim, his judgment already being corrupted by the Demon Sword's influence, saw things differently. The Emperor valued innovation. He had created the Primarchs by pushing the boundaries of genetic science. Surely he would approve of efforts to continue that work, and to push beyond current limits toward ever greater perfection. Fulgrim gave Fabius permission to proceed with his research, with one caveat. The experiments must remain secret until they bore fruit. If Fabius could enhance the gene seed, if he could create something demonstrably superior to current Space Marines, then they would present it to the Emperor as a gift. Until then, discretion was essential. Fabius agreed readily. He was a scientist first, a Space Marine second. The opportunity to push the boundaries of genetic engineering, to work with advanced Leia techniques combined with his own extensive knowledge, was irresistible. The experiments began quietly, in a research facility aboard the strike cruiser Andronius. Fabius gathered equipment, collected samples, and began his work. And his first test subjects were volunteers from among the Legion, warriors who shared Fulgrim's vision of constant improvement. Lord Commander Eidolon was the first to undergo enhancement, receiving modifications that granted him the ability to produce a devastating sonic shriek. The enhancement worked, though it came with side effects that Fabius struggled to understand. Eidolon experienced bouts of rage and pleasure that seemed disproportionate to their cause. His personality began to shift in subtle ways, becoming more erratic and unpredictable. But the enhancement was effective in combat. During a joint operation with Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard against a Slaneshi cult on Istvan Extremis, Eidolon used his new ability to destroy a powerful enemy called a Warsinger. The sonic scream tore through the enemy's defenses, killing it instantly. This success encouraged others to volunteer for enhancement. If Eidolon could be made more effective, why shouldn't others receive similar improvements? The experiments expanded, with more Marines receiving genetic and surgical modifications. What none of them realized was that the Leia genetic techniques they were using carried corruption within them. The Leia had not simply engineered themselves for perfection. They had engineered themselves in service to Slanesh, the chaos god of excess. Every genetic modification they had developed was tainted by that worship. Every technique Fabius studied carried that taint. And every Marine who received these enhancements was open to Slanesh's influence, whether they knew it or not. The corruption spread through the Legion like a slow poison, invisible and insidious, changing them in ways they couldn't perceive. The Maraviglia, when art became abomination. As the Emperor's children continued their campaigns across the galaxy, they carried with them not just warriors, but remembrances. These were the artists, poets, musicians, and historians who documented the Great Crusade for posterity. They were meant to show humanity what it was fighting for, to preserve the stories of heroism and sacrifice for future generations. The Emperor's children, with their appreciation for culture and aesthetics, welcomed these remembrances more enthusiastically than most legions. They didn't just tolerate the artists, they engaged with them, discussed philosophy and aesthetics, encouraged them to push the boundaries of their crafts. Among the remembrances attached to the 28th Expeditionary Fleet was a musician named Bekwa Kinska. She was extraordinarily talented, composing symphonies that moved listeners to tears, creating music that seemed to capture the essence of human emotion in pure sound. The Emperor's children adored her work, and she responded by pushing herself to ever greater heights of artistic achievement. Each composition was more complex than the last, each performance more emotionally powerful. She sought to create the perfect symphony, a work that would stand as the definitive artistic achievement of the Great Crusade. But Bekwa Kinska had been changed by exposure to the Lyran temples. She had walked through those twisted structures, seen their alien architecture, felt something calling to her from within. But she didn't understand what she had experienced, couldn't have named the dark power that had touched her mind. But it left her changed, filled with inspiration for a work unlike anything she had created before. She began composing a symphony she called the Maraviglia, and she worked on it with feverish intensity, barely sleeping, barely eating, driven by a compulsion to perfect every note, every harmony, every crescendo. The Maraviglia required new instruments. The sounds Kinska heard in her mind couldn't be produced by conventional means. She worked with the fleet's artificers to create devices that were half musical instrument, half weapon. They used exotic materials salvaged from Lyran, Xenos components that shouldn't have been compatible with Imperial technology, but somehow worked perfectly for her purposes. These instruments could produce sounds at frequencies that human ears weren't meant to process, harmonics that resonated not just through the air, but through the warp itself. When the Maraviglia was finally ready for performance, every warrior of the Emperor's children who could attend was invited to La Fenice, the theatre aboard the Pride of the Emperor. They filled the seats, eager to experience what promised to be the greatest artistic achievement of the Great Crusade. Fulgrim himself took a place of honor at the front, the demon sword at his side, eager to witness this culmination of human creativity. None of them suspected what was about to happen. The performance began with a single note, pure and clear. Then another joined it, and another, building into harmonies that seemed to resonate in the listener's bones. The music was beautiful beyond description, touching something primal in the Space Marines' transhuman minds. But it was also wrong in ways they couldn't articulate. The harmonics created pressure in their heads. The rhythms seemed to pulse in sync with heartbeats that beat too fast or too slow.
You know, I've been covering Warhammer lore for quite a while, and what really strikes me about this universe is how it manages to be both utterly hopeless and strangely inspiring at the same time. Every time I dive into these stories, I find myself thinking about how the setting doesn't offer easy answers or clear-cut heroes. It's a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit, flawed as it is, continues to struggle forward. And honestly, that's what keeps me coming back to this material. There's something deeply human about a universe that acknowledges how broken everything can be, yet still finds meaning in the fight itself. It's why I love sharing these stories with you, because I think we all need to be reminded sometimes that persistence matters, even when victory seems impossible. But anyways, let's get back to the video.
The melodies twisted in directions that violated musical theory while somehow remaining hauntingly beautiful. As the symphony progressed, the instruments began to produce effects beyond mere sound. Visual distortions rippled through the air. Colors that didn't exist in normal space painted themselves across the walls. The boundary between reality and the warp began to thin, then to tear. Demons of Slanesh, creatures of living sensation and corrupt pleasure, began to manifest in the theater. They wore the shapes of impossible beauty, in forms designed to tempt and corrupt through aesthetic perfection taken to its absolute extreme. The Space Marines in the audience found themselves overwhelmed by sensations they had never experienced. Their transhuman biology, designed to filter out pain and ignore fear, provided no defense against this assault. Some laughed hysterically, others wept uncontrollably. Many experienced pleasure so intense it bordered on agony, or agony so acute it transformed into pleasure. The carefully controlled emotional responses of Space Marines, honed through decades of training and genetic conditioning, shattered like glass under the symphony's influence. And then, the violence began. Space Marines turned on the mortal crew members who shared the theater, driven by impulses they couldn't control or understand. Now, some sought to create new sensations through the infliction of pain. Others pursued experiences of ecstasy through means that would have horrified their former selves. The theater became a charnel house of excess, a riot of sensation and violence that left the survivors forever changed. Those who had entered La Fenice as loyal warriors of the Emperor emerged as the first true servants of Slaanesh. Some Marines fled during the performance, sensing something terribly wrong even if they couldn't articulate what. These warriors warned others, spoke of corruption and madness, but Fulgrim, deep in the demon sword's influence, dismissed their concerns. He had experienced the Maraviglia and found it transcendent, a revelation of artistic possibility that exceeded anything he had imagined. Those who fled simply lacked the sophistication to appreciate true art, he told himself. They were bound by limited thinking, unable to see the perfection that lay beyond conventional boundaries. The musicians who performed the Maraviglia, those who hadn't been entirely consumed or killed by what they had unleashed, discovered something remarkable in the chaos. The instruments Kinska had designed could be weaponized. The same sonic frequencies that had shattered minds and thinned reality could be focused into devastating attacks. Sound could be transformed into a weapon more deadly than any bolter, capable of liquefying organs, rupturing blood vessels, and driving enemies insane with psychic feedback. The Emperor's children embraced these weapons eagerly. In seeing them as the ultimate expression of their philosophy, warfare transformed into art, death delivered through music. Chief Apothecary Fabius saw opportunity in the aftermath of the Maraviglia. Some of the Marines exposed to the performance had undergone physiological changes. Their auditory organs had been enhanced or mutated, giving them sensitivity to sound far beyond normal Space Marine capabilities. Their brains had rewired themselves to process these enhanced sounds, creating new neural pathways that transformed audio input into intense emotional and physical reactions. Fabius began studying these changes, working to understand and replicate them. If he could reliably create Marines with these enhanced auditory abilities, he could produce warriors ideally suited to wield the sonic weapons. Thus were born the Cacophony, as the first noise Marines. Fabius enhanced their hearing through surgery and genetic manipulation, implanting organs that allowed them to process impossible frequencies. He modified their brains to interpret sound as both weapon and drug, creating a feedback loop where the act of killing with sonic weapons produced intense pleasure, which in turn drove them to seek more opportunities to use their weapons. These Marines organized themselves into a dedicated unit under the command of the Legion's third captain, Marius Virosian. They trained with the sonic weapons, perfecting techniques for maximum devastation, learning to coordinate their attacks to create harmonies of destruction. The corruption of the Emperor's children was no longer subtle or gradual, and it had reached a tipping point where loyal warriors became the exception rather than the rule. The pursuit of perfection had transformed into the pursuit of sensation. The desire for excellence had become addiction to ever more extreme experiences. They no longer fought for the Emperor's vision. They fought because the act of fighting, the experience of combat, the sensation of victory, filled a need that could never be satisfied. They had become slaves to their own enhanced senses, driven to seek new sensations regardless of the cost. The road to treachery. While the Emperor's children descended into corruption, events across the galaxy were building toward catastrophe. War Master Horus, first among the Primarchs and the Emperor's chosen commander for the Great Crusade, had been wounded by a chaos artifact on the feral moon of Davin. The wound seemed minor at first, but it carried taint from the plague god Nurgle, and it drove Horus into fevered delirium. In his suffering, the chaos gods reached out to him, showing him visions of a future where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, where the Primarchs were forgotten, and Space Marines treated as tools rather than heroes. These visions, carefully crafted lies mixed with uncomfortable truths, turned Horus's loyalty to resentment and his devotion to ambition. The recovered Horus was changed. He began laying plans for rebellion, not openly at first, but through subtle preparations. He gathered Primarchs and legions he believed could be turned, positioning them for the coming conflict. He arranged for loyalist elements to be sent on missions far from Terra where they couldn't interfere with his plans. And he began the delicate work of corrupting his brothers, turning them from the Emperor's vision toward the service of chaos. Eldrad Ulthran, Farseer of Craftworld Ulthwe, foresaw the coming catastrophe. The Elder had watched humanity's expansion with concern, seeing echoes of their own downfall in the Imperium's hubris. When Eldrad's farseeing revealed Horus's corruption, he knew he had to act. The Elder had no love for humanity, but a civil war among the Space Marine legions would benefit no one except the Dark Powers. He arranged a meeting with Fulgrim on the maiden world of Tarsus, hoping to warn the Primarch and through him alert the Emperor to Horus's treachery. The meeting went catastrophically wrong. Fulgrim, his judgment already compromised by the Demon Blade's influence, refused to believe that Horus could fall to chaos. And he had fought beside Horus for decades. They were friends, brothers in all but blood. The suggestion that the War Master had been corrupted was an insult to Horus's honor and loyalty. When Eldrad pressed the point, showing evidence from his far-seeing, Fulgrim's reaction was fury rather than concern. He ordered his Marines to attack the Elder delegation, seeing this as Xenos treachery rather than attempted aid. The Emperor's children destroyed the maiden world of Tarsus through Exterminatus, reducing its surface to molten glass. They pursued Eldrad's forces to other maiden worlds in the region, destroying them all in acts of genocidal fury. Fulgrim justified these actions as righteous punishment for Xenos presumption. The Eldar had dared to speak against the War Master, to suggest corruption where there was only loyalty. As they had to be made an example, shown the consequences of spreading such lies. But in truth, this rampage was the Demon Sword's influence manifesting directly. Every act of violence, every world destroyed, every innocent killed, fed Slaanesh's power and tightened the demon's grip on Fulgrim's soul. In the aftermath of the Tarsus massacre, Horus summoned Fulgrim to his flagship. It was time, the War Master decided, to bring the Emperor's children openly into his rebellion. Fulgrim came expecting to clear up any misunderstandings about the Tarsus incident. Instead, Horus revealed his plans for rebellion, his alliance with the Dark Powers, and his intention to overthrow the Emperor. Fulgrim was shocked, torn between loyalty to the Emperor and loyalty to his friend. The Demon Sword whispered constantly now, no longer subtle in its urgings. And Horus applied pressure of his own, speaking to Fulgrim's deepest desires and greatest fears. The Emperor, Horus argued, had abandoned the Great Crusade to pursue mysterious projects back on Terra. He had taken the most interesting parts of the war for himself, leaving the Primarchs and their legions to do the tedious work of conquest while he pursued godhood. The Emperor had created the Primarchs as tools, not sons. Once they had served their purpose, conquering the galaxy for him, they would be discarded or controlled. And the Emperor's vision of human perfection was limited, Horus said. He refused to acknowledge the possibilities offered by chaos, the potential for humanity to transcend its current limitations through acceptance of warp power. This last argument, combined with the Demon Blade's influence, broke through Fulgrim's resistance. The pursuit of perfection had always been his driving motivation. If there were paths to greater perfection that the Emperor refused to explore, wasn't it his duty to investigate them? If ultimate excellence required embracing powers the Emperor had forbidden, wasn't that worth the risk? The logic was twisted, the reasoning corrupted, but it made sense to Fulgrim's compromised judgment. He agreed to join Horus's rebellion, believing he was serving a higher form of the Emperor's vision rather than betraying it. The corruption spread rapidly through the Emperor's children's command structure. Fulgrim began meeting with his Lord Commanders, sharing Horus's arguments with them, feeling out their loyalty. Most fell quickly, and their own exposure to corruption through Fabius's experiments and the Maraviglia, making them susceptible to Chaos's influence. They embraced the new path eagerly, seeing it as liberation rather than betrayal. They could finally pursue perfection without the Emperor's restrictions, finally experience everything the universe had to offer without artificial limitations. But not all of the Emperor's children fell. Lord Commander Vespasian had witnessed the meeting with Eldrad, had heard the Farseer's warnings about Horus's corruption. He had obeyed his Primarch's orders at Tarsus, but the massacre of innocent worlds had troubled him deeply. Now, hearing Fulgrim speak of allying with warp powers, seeing the changes in his Primarch and his brothers, Vespasian realized the truth. The Emperor's children were being corrupted and turned from their original purpose. He began quietly reaching out to other like-minded warriors, building a network of those who still held to their original oaths. Captain Solomon Demeter of 2nd Company was among those who answered Vespasian's call. Demeter had commanded his forces with distinction throughout the Great Crusade, embodying the Emperor's children's original ideals of perfection through discipline and training. He saw the changes in the Legion as a perversion of everything they once stood for. The pursuit of sensation through combat, the obsession with sonic weapons, the worship of experience over excellence, these were not the values the Legion had been founded upon. Together with Vespasian and others, Demeter began planning resistance. The most prominent loyalist was Captain Saul Tarvitz of the 10th Company. Tarvitz embodied everything the Emperor's children had once represented: martial excellence, cultural refinement, unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. He had earned the respect of the entire Legion through his skill and dedication. When he learned of the rebellion, Tarvitz was faced with an impossible choice. His Primarch and most of his brothers had turned traitor, but his oath was to the Emperor, not to Fulgrim. The Legion that had defined his identity was turning against everything it once believed. Tarvitz chose loyalty over brotherhood, righteousness over loyalty to his corrupted comrades. The Istvan atrocity. Horus's plans for rebellion required eliminating loyalist elements within the traitor legions. He couldn't afford to have warriors of questionable loyalty within his ranks when the war began in earnest. Yet the solution was brutal and efficient, a purge disguised as a military operation. The world of Istvan III and the Istvan system had rebelled against imperial authority, and Horus ordered several legions to bring it back into compliance. What the loyalist elements within those legions didn't know was that this deployment was designed to kill them. The Emperor's children, along with elements of the sons of Horus, World Eaters, and Death Guard, deployed to Istvan III's surface to put down the rebellion. But the forces sent planetside were carefully selected. Every squad contained a disproportionate number of warriors whose loyalty to the Emperor might override their loyalty to their Primarchs. Tarvitz commanded a significant portion of the Emperor's children forces, while Vespasian and Demeter led other formations. They were told they were being given the honor of spearheading the assault. In truth, they were being sent to their deaths. Once the loyalist elements were committed to the surface, Horus planned to virus bomb the planet from orbit. Life Eater virus, one of the most horrific weapons in the Imperial arsenal, would scour Istvan III clean of all organic life. The traitor legionaries would die alongside the rebels they had been sent to fight, and the traitor Primarchs could claim it was a tragic accident, an overzealous response to prevent the rebellion from spreading. The plan was nearly perfect, and it would have succeeded if not for Captain Tarvitz's determination and the courage of those who stood with him. Tarvitz had remained aboard the fleet during the initial deployment, assigned to coordinate fleet support for the ground forces. This seemingly routine assignment saved his life and gave him the opportunity to discover the true plan. He overheard discussions among the traitor elements about the upcoming virus bombing, about the need to eliminate the loyalists before they could interfere with the rebellion. Tarvitz realized immediately what this meant. Thousands of his brothers, loyal warriors who still served the Emperor, were about to be murdered by their own side. He had only minutes to act. Commandeering a Thunderhawk gunship, Tarvitz flew to the surface at maximum speed, broadcasting warnings on all channels. The loyalists on the ground initially didn't believe him. The idea that their own Primarchs would virus bomb them was too absurd, too evil to contemplate. But Tarvitz's reputation for integrity and his obvious desperate sincerity convinced enough of them to take precautions. When the virus bombs fell, many loyalists had taken shelter in sealed bunkers or commandeered void-capable vehicles that could protect them from the virus. The Life Eater did its work with terrifying efficiency. The atmosphere of Istvan III became poison, and anything organic that breathed it died in agony. The rebels, the loyalists had been fighting, died. Most of the loyalist Marines died, but thousands survived, protected by Tarvitz's warning and their own quick action. They emerged from shelter to find their world transformed into a nightmare landscape of death. The sky still thick with virus particles, the very ground beneath their feet dead and sterile. The survivors rallied around Tarvitz, Vespasian, and Demeter. They knew they had been betrayed, knew that their own legions had tried to murder them, but they were still Space Marines, still warriors of the Emperor. If they were going to die, they would die fighting, not cowering in bunkers. They took stock of their resources, fortified their positions, and prepared for the inevitable assault. The traitors couldn't leave survivors to tell the tale of this betrayal. They would have to come down and finish the job in person. The battle that followed was one of the most tragic in Imperial history. Brother fought brother. Warriors who had trained together and fought together for decades now trying to kill each other. The Loyalists knew they couldn't win, not against the overwhelming numbers arrayed against them, but they could make the traitors pay in blood for every step forward. But they could delay the rebellion, buy time for word of this treachery to reach Terra, and they could die with honor, knowing they had stayed true to their oaths. The Emperor's children were at the forefront of the assault, eager to eliminate the Loyalists who represented everything they once were. Fulgrim himself led forces to the surface, determined to personally oversee the destruction of those who refused to embrace the new path. The Cacophony deployed their sonic weapons, creating barrages of psychosonic destruction that liquefied anyone caught in their effect. Fabius's enhanced Marines charged into melee combat, experiencing pleasure from every kill, driven by sensations that loyal Marines couldn't understand or counter. Captain Lucius, commander of the 13th Company and a duelist without peer, he had initially been among the Loyalists on the surface, but when he saw the tide turning against them, when he realized that staying loyal meant dying without glory, his pride overtook his loyalty. Lucius had always been vain, always jealous of others' successes. Tarvitz's command of the Loyalist defense grated on him, as did the respect other warriors showed Tarvitz. In a moment of supreme selfishness, Lucius turned on his former comrades, attacking the very warriors he had fought beside for decades. He personally killed numerous Loyalists, proving his renewed loyalty to Fulgrim through the blood of his brothers. This act of betrayal earned him acceptance back into the traitor ranks and would eventually lead to his ascension as Slanesh's chosen champion. The fighting on Istvan III lasted months, but the Loyalists fell back to increasingly desperate positions, their numbers dwindling through attrition and constant assault. They fought with courage and skill that would have made the Emperor proud, but courage and skill couldn't overcome impossible odds. One by one, the Loyalist strongpoints fell. Vespasian died, leading a counterattack that temporarily relieved pressure on Tarvitz's headquarters. Demeter fell defending a supply depot that the survivors needed to continue resistance. Thousands of loyal Marines died, their names recorded in the memories of those who survived to carry tales of their valor to Loyalist forces. Tarvitz held out longer than anyone believed possible. He commanded the last stronghold, a fortified position in the ruins of what had once been Istvan III's central hive city. While he had perhaps 100 Marines with him at the end, all that remained of the thousands who had survived the virus bombing. They knew they were going to die. They had known it from the moment the virus bombs fell. But they would make the traitors remember this day, remember the cost of betraying the Emperor. The final assault came as a massive bombardment from orbit, followed by a ground assault in overwhelming force. Horus was tired of the delay, tired of watching his carefully planned rebellion get bogged down in this unnecessary siege. He ordered the surface turned to molten glass, killing loyalists and traitors alike in the bombardment just to end the battle. Tarvitz and his surviving warriors died in the firestorm, denied even the honor of dying in combat. Their names would be remembered by the loyalists, but the traitors would speak of them only as cautionary tales of misplaced loyalty. The Istvan atrocity, as it became known, claimed thousands of lives and set the stage for the larger civil war to come. It also marked a point of no return for the Emperor's children. They had murdered their own brothers, warriors they had trained and fought alongside for decades. They had followed their Primarch into damnation, and there was no going back now. The legion that had once been the Emperor's chosen exemplars of perfection had become something monstrous, and they would only descend further into corruption as the war progressed. The drop site massacre. With the loyalist elements purged from the traitor ranks, Horus prepared to openly declare his rebellion. But he knew the Emperor would respond with overwhelming force once the treachery was revealed. He needed to cripple the loyalist legions before they could organize an effective counterattack. The trap he set at Istvan V was brilliantly conceived and horrifyingly effective, a betrayal that would echo through Imperial history as one of its darkest moments. 7 loyalist legions were dispatched to Istvan to punish the traitors. The Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands in the first wave, with the Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, Night Lords, and Word Bearers as the second wave. What the Loyalists didn't know was that 4 of these legions had already turned traitor. The second wave wasn't coming to reinforce. They were coming to attack their allies from behind, catching the Loyalists in a deadly crossfire. And the Emperor's children stood with the sons of Horus, World Eaters, and Death Guard on Istvan V, preparing to face the Loyalist assault. They had fortified their positions extensively, building defensive works that would force the Loyalists into killing zones. But they knew the real advantage wasn't their defensive position. It was the second wave of Loyalists who would turn on their brothers at the critical moment. The plan was elegant in its evil, and it required only that they hold against the first wave long enough for the trap to spring. Ferrus Manus led the Iron Hands in the spearhead assault, driven by rage at his brother Fulgrim's betrayal. Ferrus and Fulgrim had been close friends, closer than many actual brothers. The thought that Fulgrim had turned traitor, that he had aligned with dark powers and abandoned the Emperor's vision, filled Ferrus with fury that overrode his tactical judgment. He wanted Fulgrim's head, wanted to personally punish his former friend for this betrayal. This anger, this personal focus on vengeance rather than military objective, played perfectly into the traitor's hands. The initial assault was brutal. The Iron Hands crashed into the traitor lines with the full weight of an enraged legion behind them. The Raven Guard and Salamanders attacked from the flanks, trying to roll up the traitor positions and create an opening for breakthrough. For a time, it seemed the assault might succeed despite being outnumbered. The Loyalist Marines fought with righteous fury, determined to punish the traitors for their betrayal at Istvan III, but they pushed forward against fierce resistance, taking casualties but gaining ground. Then the second wave arrived, and the trap snapped shut. The Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, Night Lords, and Word Bearers opened fire on the Loyalists from behind, catching them in a crossfire from which there was no escape. The shock of this second betrayal paralyzed some Loyalist units momentarily. These were their brother legions, warriors who should have been allies. The sudden realization that the betrayal ran so much deeper than anyone had suspected, that half the legions sent to Istvan were actually traitors, broke the cohesion of the Loyalist assault. The battlefield became a slaughter. Loyalist Marines found themselves surrounded, attacked from all sides by forces that outnumbered them overwhelmingly. But the Raven Guard and Salamanders tried to extract their forces, to salvage what they could from the disaster. But the Iron Hands, driven by Ferrus Manus's rage, pressed forward even as their flanks collapsed. Ferrus couldn't retreat, wouldn't retreat, not when Fulgrim was within reach. He fought his way toward the Emperor's children lines, determined to face his former friend in single combat. Fulgrim met him willingly. The Phoenician was eager for this confrontation, eager to prove that his new path was superior to the Emperor's limiting vision. He wielded Forgebreaker, the hammer Ferrus had crafted for him, while Ferrus carried Fireblade, the sword Fulgrim had made. They were fighting each other with weapons they had made as gifts, symbols of brotherhood turned to instruments of fratricide. The duel was fierce and devastating, as two Primarchs in their prime battling with skill and fury that left the ground around them cratered and broken. The fight raged across the battlefield, both Primarchs too focused on each other to notice anything else. Ferrus's anger gave him strength, but it also made him reckless. He attacked with brutal efficiency, driving Fulgrim back step by step. For a moment, it seemed the Gorgon would triumph, that righteous fury would overcome corruption. Then the demon in Fulgrim's silver sword surged forward, taking direct control of the Primarch's body. Possessed by the demon, Fulgrim fought with speed and precision that exceeded even his normal superhuman capabilities. He parried Ferrus's attacks with contemptuous ease, found openings in the Gorgon's guard that shouldn't have existed. The silver sword struck again and again, each blow tearing through Ferrus's armor, drawing blood from wounds that should have been impossible to inflict on a Primarch. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the demon guided Fulgrim's sword in a decapitating strike. Ferrus Manus's head fell to the ground, his body collapsing beside it. The Primarch of the Iron Hands, one of the Emperor's most loyal sons, was dead, killed by his closest friend, who had been too weak to resist Chaos's corruption. The sight of their Primarch's death broke the Iron Hands completely. Some fled in disarray, others fought to the death where they stood, seeking to avenge their father even knowing it was hopeless. The legion that had once been known for its discipline and cold efficiency shattered into fragments, its leadership dead, its cohesion destroyed. Yet the slaughter continued for hours. By the time the battle ended, 3 legions had been effectively destroyed. The Iron Hands survived in fragments, scattered warbands that would spend the rest of the heresy trying to avenge their Primarch. The Raven Guard and Salamanders limped away with perhaps a quarter of their original strength, too badly mauled to participate effectively in the larger war. The traitors had achieved their objective. They had crippled the loyalist response and bought time for Horus to prepare his assault on Terra. But the cost to the Emperor's children was significant in ways beyond casualties. Watching Fulgrim kill Ferrus Manus, seeing their Primarch murder his closest friend while possessed by a demon, forced even the most corrupted among them to confront what they had become. They had betrayed everything they once stood for. They had allied with powers they didn't understand and couldn't control. And their Primarch, the living embodiment of perfection they had spent their lives trying to emulate, was now just a meat puppet for a warp entity. Some of the Emperor's children tried to exorcise the demon from Fulgrim. Lucius, Marius Verocian, and Fabius Bile attempted to torture the entity out of their Primarch's body, using techniques that would have killed anyone else. For a time, they seemed to succeed. Fulgrim regained control, genuinely horrified by what he had been forced to do. He wept over Ferrus's corpse, begged forgiveness from a brother who could no longer hear him. He even tried to warn the Emperor to reveal the full extent of Horus's plans. But this moment of clarity was brief. The demon was too deeply rooted, its grip too strong, and worse, the real Fulgrim was fading. The corruption hadn't just possessed him, it was transforming him, consuming what remained of his original personality and replacing it with something that thought only of sensation and excess. The brief struggle for control ended with the demon victorious. Fulgrim's original soul either destroyed or locked away so deeply it might as well not exist. The Primarch who emerged from this internal battle was no longer truly Fulgrim, though it wore his face and spoke with his voice. It was a thing of pure corruption, a being dedicated entirely to Slaanesh and the pursuit of sensation without limit or morality. And it led the Emperor's children deeper into damnation, teaching them that there were no boundaries they shouldn't cross, and no depths they shouldn't plumb, no acts too depraved if they provided new experiences. Ascension to Demon Prince. As the heresy progressed, Fulgrim underwent a transformation that completed his fall from the Emperor's perfect son to Slaanesh's champion. The process of becoming a demon prince is rarely described in detail in Imperial records, both because few have witnessed it and survived to report, and because the specifics are too horrifying for most minds to process. What is known suggests that Fulgrim's transformation took place during a blasphemous ritual involving thousands of sacrifices and the full attention of the Dark Prince. The ritual occurred on a world that has since been stricken from all Imperial records, its very existence erased from official histories. There, in temples built specifically for this purpose, the Emperor's children offered up souls to Slaanesh in numbers that defy comprehension. Captives taken from loyalist worlds, slaves seized in raids, even traitor humans who had served the Legion and were now deemed expendable. All were sacrificed in elaborate ceremonies designed to thin the barrier between reality and the warp. As the ritual reached its climax, Fulgrim shed his mortal form like a snake shedding skin. His body twisted and grew, bones elongating, muscles reshaping themselves into configurations that shouldn't have been possible. His lower body merged and transformed, becoming serpentine, a massive tail that could crush tanks or sweep entire squads of warriors from their feet. Additional arms sprouted from his torso, each ending in clawed hands or grasping appendages. His face remained beautiful, but it was a beauty that hurt to look upon, perfection taken to such an extreme that it became monstrous. Fulgrim was reborn as a demon prince, a being existing partially in the material universe and partially in the warp. He possessed physical power far exceeding what he had wielded as a Primarch, along with psychic abilities he had never displayed before. He could move with impossible speed, teleporting short distances by stepping briefly into the warp. He could manipulate emotions and sensations in those around him, driving them to excess or paralyzing them with overwhelming stimulation. And he radiated an aura of terrible presence that broke the will of anyone who faced him without absolute dedication to duty. The newly transformed demon Primarch celebrated his ascension by leading the Emperor's children in a campaign of destruction across loyalist territories. Whole worlds were conquered not for strategic value, but for the experience of conquest, for the sensation of breaking an enemy's will and watching civilizations collapse. The Emperor's children didn't simply kill their enemies. They made artistic arrangements of corpses, created symphonies from screams, crafted new drugs from the rendered flesh of the innocent. They had become a plague of sensation, and wherever they went, reality itself began to warp under the weight of their excess. The Siege of Terror. When Horus finally made his move against Terror itself, the Emperor's children were eager participants in the assault. But their role in the siege would prove controversial even among traitors. While other legions threw themselves against the Imperial Palace's defenses, sacrificing themselves to breach the walls and reach the Emperor's children largely abandoned the military objectives of the siege in favor of pursuing their own twisted pleasures among Terra's helpless civilian population. The assault on the Saturnine Gate saw the full strength of the Emperor's children deployed. Over 100,000 Marines gathered under Fulgrim's direct command. This was the largest concentration of the Legion since the Great Crusade's height, a force that should have been capable of breaching even the Imperial Palace's formidable defenses. But the assault failed catastrophically. Rogor, Primarch of the Imperial Fists and architect of Terra's defenses, had anticipated the traitors' attack vectors and prepared killing zones that turned the assault into a slaughter. Fulgrim himself jeweled Dawn during the attack, the two Primarchs meeting blade to blade while the battle raged around them. The fight was fierce, but ultimately inconclusive. Dawn's defensive mastery matched Fulgrim's offensive brilliance. Neither could gain a decisive advantage. And when news reached Fulgrim that the broader assault had failed, that the Saturnine Gate would not fall, the demon Primarch simply lost interest. He withdrew from the battle, abandoning his marines to their fate, bored by the prospect of a prolonged siege. But this abandonment of military objectives in favor of personal pleasure became the defining characteristic of the Emperor's children's participation in the siege. While the sons of Horus, Death Guard, World Eaters, and Iron Warriors bled themselves against the palace walls, the Emperor's children turned their attention to Terra's undefended civilian population. They rampaged through hive cities and worker districts, slaughtering millions in acts of cruelty that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. The atrocities committed by the Emperor's children during the siege are among the darkest in human history. They didn't simply kill. They experimented with pain and pleasure, pushing their victims to extremes of sensation before granting them death as a final release. Millions were rendered down into exotic drugs as their bodies processed to create stimulants that enhanced the Marines' already supernatural senses. Countless others died in acts of violence so creative and horrifying that survivors who witnessed them were left permanently insane, unable to process what they had seen. The Emperor's children set up laboratories where they could refine their techniques, where Fabius Bile and his fellow apothecaries could experiment on live subjects in pursuit of new enhancements and experiences. They transformed captured civilians into living art installations, sculpting flesh and bone into shapes that defied human understanding. They created symphonies from the screams of the dying, recording these sounds for later playback and enhancement. They staged elaborate performances, where the deaths of captives were choreographed like dance routines, or with noise marines providing musical accompaniment to the slaughter. These actions, while militarily useless, served Slanesh's purposes perfectly. Every atrocity weakened the barrier between reality and the warp in that location. Every extreme experience fed the Dark Prince's power. Terra, the Emperor's own throne world, the heart of the Imperium, was being transformed into a feeding ground for the chaos god of excess. If the siege had lasted longer, if Horus had succeeded in killing the Emperor, the corruption might have spread until Terra itself became a demon world, lost forever to the warp. In a strange way, the Emperor's children's abandonment of military discipline may have helped the Loyalists. If those 100,000 Marines had focused on breaching the palace walls instead of indulging their depravities, they might have created the opening Horus needed, but they were too far gone into corruption to maintain focus on abstract objectives like conquest when immediate sensation was available. They had become slaves to their appetites, and those appetites demanded experiences the siege offered in abundance. When the siege of Terra finally ended with Horus's death at the Emperor's hands, the Emperor's children were among the first to flee. They had accumulated vast numbers of captives during their rampage through Terra's population, and they brought these unfortunates with them into the warp. The retreat was not orderly. Different warbands fled in different directions, each focusing on preserving their own forces and treasures rather than maintaining legion cohesion. The unity the Emperor's children had once been famous for was completely gone, and all replaced by fragmented groups, unified only by their dedication to Slanesh and their pursuit of sensation. The shattering. The retreat to the Eye of Terror should have provided the Emperor's children with safety and opportunity to rebuild. Instead, it marked the beginning of their destruction as a coherent legion. The root of this collapse was simple. They had brought vast numbers of captives with them, and they consumed those captives with terrifying speed. The raids into real space that followed weren't motivated by strategic concerns or revenge against the Imperium. They were desperate attempts to acquire more victims, more raw material for the experiences the Legion craved. But raiding real space had limits. Imperial defenses were strengthening as the Great Scouring drove traitor forces back into the Eye. Each raid became more difficult, or more costly. Eventually, The Emperor's children made a decision that would doom them. They began raiding other traitor forces. If captives from real space were in short supply, why not take slaves from the servants of the other traitor legions? After all, everyone knew the Emperor's children were Slayanesh's favored. Surely the other Chaos gods wouldn't mind if their followers contributed to the Dark Prince's glory. This arrogance triggered what became known as the Eye of Terror, slave wars. The other traitor legions responded to the Emperor's children's raids with fury. The World Eaters were particularly enraged, and their response was characteristically violent. During what became known as the Battle of Skalathrax, the World Eaters and Emperor's children clashed on a frozen world, where daytime temperatures were survivable, but nighttime cold would kill even space marines without shelter. The battle raged across Skalathrax's surface for days. Both sides suffered terribly from the cold, with marines freezing to death when they couldn't reach shelter before nightfall. The fighting was brutal and chaotic, lacking the tactical sophistication of earlier engagements. This was pure fury unleashed, warriors killing each other for reasons they could barely articulate. Then Khan, captain of the World Eaters' 8th Assault Company, lost whatever remained of his sanity. Seeing his brothers retreating to shelter as night fell, Khan began killing them. If they wouldn't fight through the night, if they valued their lives over victory, then they deserved death. Yet he turned his chain axe on friend and foe alike, slaughtering anyone who tried to escape the cold. His rampage broke both legions completely. The World Eaters scattered in all directions, never to reunite as a cohesive force. The Emperor's children fared little better, fragmenting into hundreds of smaller warbands, each led by a captain or lord who decided to strike out on their own rather than maintain legion structure. Fabius Bile attempted to hold the Emperor's children together. As chief apothecary and one of the few remaining senior commanders, he took nominal command of what remained of the legion, establishing a base at Canticle City on the demon world of Harmony. From there, he tried to rebuild some semblance of organization, but his methods were controversial even among traitors. Bile raided the other legion's fortresses, seizing gene seed to fuel his cloning experiments. He abducted promising warriors from other warbands, bringing them to his laboratories for experimentation. His ultimate achievement during this period was stealing the corpse of Horus himself from the Sons of Horus, a theft that infuriated Abaddon and led to open warfare. The conflict culminated in the destruction of Canticle City. Abaddon led the nascent Black Legion against Harmony, seeking to punish Bile for the theft of Horus's body and to establish his dominance over the other traitor legions. The battle laid waste to the Emperor's children's last major stronghold. Fabius escaped with his experiments and a core of loyal followers, but any remaining pretense of legion unity died with Canticle City's fall. The Emperor's children ceased to exist as a unified force, becoming instead hundreds of competing warbands, each pursuing its own vision of perfection through excess. Fulgrim himself had abandoned the Legion long before this point. The Demon Primarch retreated to a personal realm within the Warp, a planet of pleasure created specifically to satisfy his infinite appetite for sensation. There, it is said, he indulges in experiences so extreme that mortal minds cannot comprehend them. Some who worship Slaanesh spend their entire lives searching for this mythical place, believing that reaching it would grant them ultimate enlightenment. None ever return from their quest. The modern threat. In the current era, 10,000 years after the Horus heresy, the Emperor's children exist only as scattered warbands. Yet they remain one of the most dangerous threats the Imperium faces. While their raids are unpredictable and devastating, driven not by strategic objectives, but by the pursuit of new sensations and experiences. A world that seems worthless to any rational military planner might be targeted by the Emperor's children simply because its population offers some unique quality they desire. A crucial forge world might be ignored while they attack a pleasure world, drawn by the promise of more sophisticated victims who can appreciate the artistry of their deaths. The opening of the Great Rift has only made matters worse. The massive warp storm that split the galaxy in two has allowed the Emperor's children to raid with impunity across vast regions of Imperial space. Worlds that were once safe behind layers of defense now find themselves exposed to raiders emerging from warp rifts. And the Emperor's children take full advantage, appearing without warning to carry out raids that leave entire populations dead or worse. The warbands themselves vary tremendously in size and composition. Some number only a few dozen Marines, operating from a single ship, raiding small targets for specific prizes. Others command thousands of warriors, along with mortal cultists, demon engines, and even allied daemon forces. The largest warbands can threaten entire sectors, and their leaders style themselves as champions of Slaanesh, competing to outdo each other in acts of creative excess. Fulgrim has been cited increasingly often since the Great Rift opened. The Demon Primarch appears to be taking a more active role in the current era, leading his scattered sons in campaigns that suggest some level of coordinated planning, which whether this represents a true reunification of the Legion or simply Fulgrim occasionally exercising authority over his wayward children remains unclear. What is certain is that when the Phoenician appears on the battlefield, entire armies can be routed by his mere presence, and even the bravest defenders find their will to resist eroded by the overwhelming sensation of facing a demon primarch. The horror of how they fight. Understanding the true threat of the Emperor's children requires examining not just their history, but their methods. They fight in ways that are fundamentally different from other Chaos forces, reflecting their dedication to sensation and experience, rather than simple victory. Every aspect of their warfare is designed to maximize the intensity of the experience, both for themselves and their victims. Where other Chaos forces might simply kill their enemies as efficiently as possible, the Emperor's children transform each engagement into a performance, a carefully choreographed display of martial prowess that serves both tactical and aesthetic purposes. The foundation of their combat doctrine remains speed and overwhelming force applied at precisely calculated points of weakness. They study their opponents obsessively before engagement, analyzing communication patterns, observing defensive preparations, identifying psychological vulnerabilities in enemy commanders. This intelligence-gathering phase can last weeks or months, with scouts and spies infiltrating enemy positions, observing from concealment, building comprehensive profiles of every aspect of the target's military capacity. When they finally strike, the assault comes with such velocity and violence that defenders rarely have time to mount effective resistance. Emperor's children strike forces favor high-speed vehicles, bikes that scream across battlefields at speeds that turn their riders into blurs, land speeders modified for even greater acceleration, rhino transports with enhanced engines that sacrifice armor for velocity. They hit enemy lines like a tidal wave of purple and gold, crashing through defenses before reinforcements can deploy. But it's their use of sonic weaponry that has become their most distinctive and terrifying characteristic. These weapons represent a fusion of Xeno's technology, looted from the Lair, Dark Age human science, recovered from forgotten archives, and warp-fueled enhancements that push sound itself into the realm of the supernatural. The result is arsenal of destruction that kills in ways conventional weapons cannot match. The basic sonic blaster, standard armament for noise marines, generates precisely calibrated sound waves at frequencies designed to resonate with organic tissue. When these waves strike a target, they don't just damage the surface. They penetrate deep into the body, setting up standing wave patterns that literally tear the victim apart from the inside. Bones shatter as the sound waves create stress fractures at molecular level. Internal organs liquefy as cellular structures rupture en masse. Blood vessels explode as pressure waves exceed what biological tissues can withstand. The experience of being hit by a sonic blaster is reportedly worse than the physical damage alone would suggest. Survivors, the few who exist, describe sensations that transcend simple pain. The sound itself becomes a physical presence, a crushing weight that bears down on consciousness. Neural pathways fire randomly as the sonic assault overloads the nervous system, Some victims report experiencing intense euphoria mixed with agony, pleasure centers activating alongside pain receptors in a confusion of signals that the brain cannot properly process. Others describe a sense of dissolution, as if their very identity is being torn apart by the sound, scattered across frequencies like notes in a discord symphony. The weapons themselves are as much artwork as armament. Each sonic blaster is individually crafted, decorated with symbols and embellishments that reflect its owner's personality and achievements. Some are adorned with skulls that seem to scream when the weapon fires, and others sport living flesh grafted onto their housings, mouth-like apertures that produce the destructive harmonics. Still others appear almost musical instruments resembling guitars or horns, their appearance belying the devastation they can unleash. Noise Marines spend years, sometimes centuries, mastering their weapons. They learn to modulate frequencies for different effects, to create harmonics that can punch through armor or bypass force fields, to coordinate their fire with fellow squad members, to produce combined effects greater than the sum of individual attacks. In some warbands, Noise Marine squads practice their coordination like orchestras rehearsing a symphony, with squad leaders serving as conductors, directing the tempo and intensity of their deadly music. The Blastmaster is a larger variant of the sonic blaster, and a heavy weapon that requires a dedicated operator and produces effects on an entirely different scale, where a sonic blaster might kill individual soldiers or small groups. A Blastmaster can level buildings, shatter armored vehicles, and break entire formations with a single sustained burst. The weapon generates bass notes so powerful that the very ground shakes, creating earthquake-like effects that destabilize enemy positions. A skilled Blastmaster operator becomes a strategic asset, capable of destroying targets that would normally require heavy ordnance. They can bring down fortress walls by finding the resonant frequency of the material and amplifying it until structural integrity fails. They can disable armored vehicles by targeting specific components, or using precisely calibrated frequencies to shatter engine blocks or rupture fuel tanks. They can even target enemy morale directly, producing sounds at frequencies that induce panic or despair, breaking the will to fight without necessarily killing anyone. The psychological impact of facing Noise Marines cannot be overstated. The sound of their approach carries across battlefields long before they arrive, a discordant wailing that sets teeth on edge and sends involuntary shivers down spines. Defenders hear their comrades dying in ways that don't make sense, screaming not from wounds, but from sound itself. They watch as solid cover provides no protection, as the sonic weapons punch through walls and barriers as if they weren't there. The normal rules of warfare stop applying, and the resulting psychological dislocation can be as effective as physical casualties in breaking enemy resistance. Some Noise Marines enhance their weapons with additional modifications drawn from forbidden lore. Warp amplifiers channel psychic energy through the sonic projection, creating attacks that damage not just the body, but the soul. Daemon-possessed components add unpredictable effects, with attacks sometimes producing miniature warp rifts, or summoning lesser demons through the target's dying screams. Xenos technology looted from Eldar or Tau adds additional capabilities, combining different schools of sonic warfare into weapons that no single race intended to exist. The Doom Siren represents another evolution of sonic weaponry, a close-range device that produces a concentrated blast of sound so intense it can strip flesh from bone. Mounted on backpacks or integrated into armor, Doom Sirens allow even non-Noise Marine specialists to wield sonic destruction. The weapon's short range is offset by its incredible lethality, with entire enemy squads disappearing into clouds of liquefied biomass when caught by a Doom Siren's wail. Beyond their weapons, the Noise Marines themselves have been transformed into living instruments of sensation. Their augmentations go far beyond even the extensive modifications normal Space Marines receive. Their auditory organs have been enhanced through surgery, genetic manipulation, and warp-touched augmentation until they can perceive sounds across a spectrum that spans from subsonic rumbles to ultrasonic frequencies that would shatter unmodified eardrums. They hear individual heartbeats from hundreds of meters away, can track enemies by the sound of breathing, distinguish between types of ammunition by the acoustic signature of its discharge. But these enhanced senses come with a curse. Normal sounds, the kind that humans find pleasant or ignore entirely, have become muted and dull to noise marines. They require increasingly extreme auditory stimulation to feel anything at all. The roar of battle, once deafening, becomes a pleasant background noise. The screams of dying enemies, which would drive normal humans to madness, register as music. They are addicted to sound in the most literal sense, a craving, ever more intense acoustic experiences just to feel alive. This addiction drives them to seek combat with a fervor that exceeds even other Chaos Space Marines. Between battles, noise marines often fall into something approaching depression, their senses understimulated, their bodies craving the sensory assault that only warfare provides. Some try to fill this void with recorded sounds, massive libraries of battle noise and dying screams that they play at volumes that would kill unaugmented humans. Others create their own music, improvising on instruments that blend conventional musical theory with the science of destruction. The modifications extend beyond hearing. Many noise marines have had their pain receptors rewired, either dulled to the point where even mortal wounds produce only mild discomfort, or enhanced and redirected so that pain itself becomes pleasurable. This makes them extraordinarily difficult to stop through conventional means. Wounds that would incapacitate normal warriors barely slow a noise marine. Some actively seek injury, throwing themselves into enemy fire, not from suicidal impulse, but from desire to experience the sensation of being wounded. Their brains have been altered as well, neural pathways restructured to process combat as an aesthetic experience. They perceive warfare not just as a tactical challenge, but as a form of art, with each engagement offering opportunities for creative expression. The pattern of blood spray becomes a painting, the rhythm of weapons fire becomes percussion, the choreography of melee combat becomes dance. This artistic sensibility makes them unpredictable opponents, as they might break off from tactically sound actions to pursue aesthetically pleasing alternatives. Combat drugs play a crucial role in enhancing these already superhuman capabilities. The Emperor's children are constantly experimenting with new chemical compounds, seeking the perfect blend of stimulants, pain modulators, and sensory enhancers. Each warband has its own preferred formulas, recipes jealously guarded and constantly refined through experimentation on both volunteers and captives. Some drugs heighten reflexes to supernatural levels, allowing users to perceive time as flowing in slow motion. A warrior enhanced by these compounds can track individual bullets in flight, dodge attacks that should be impossible to see coming, and react to threats with such speed that they seem to teleport between positions. The downside is that normal time perception becomes agonizingly slow between battles, with minutes feeling like hours, forcing users into constant motion just to avoid the psychological torture of existing at normal speed. Other drugs enhance strength and endurance, pushing modified Space Marine physiology beyond its already impressive limits. Users can fight for days without rest, shrug off wounds that would kill unenhanced Marines, and generate bursts of strength that allow them to tear through heavy armor with their bare hands. But these drugs exact a terrible toll on the body, burning through muscle tissue and organ function at accelerated rates. Long-term users become increasingly dependent, their bodies unable to function normally without chemical enhancement. Still others target the emotional centers of the brain, amplifying specific feelings or sensations. Rage inducers turn normally disciplined warriors into berserkers who attack with reckless fury. Euphoria generators create states of chemical bliss that make users fearless and pain immune. Fear suppressors eliminate self-preservation instincts entirely, creating warriors who will charge into certain death without hesitation. The Emperor's children mix these compounds in complex cocktails, creating psychological states optimized for specific combat situations. The most disturbing drugs are those derived from human suffering. The Emperor's children have perfected techniques for extracting chemical compounds from the bodies and brains of torture victims, refining these substances into powerful enhancers. They believe that fear and pain improve the quality of these extracts, leading to refinement processes that are acts of deliberate cruelty. Victims are kept alive and conscious throughout, their suffering prolonged and intensified to maximize yield. These human-derived drugs produce effects that purely synthetic compounds cannot match. They create states of heightened perception where users report being able to sense enemy emotions, to smell fear and taste despair on the air. They grant brief flashes of prescience, moments where the future seems to crystallize with perfect clarity. They enhance psychic abilities in those who possess them, or even grant rudimentary psychic powers to those who previously had none. But they also carry traces of their source material, with users sometimes experiencing fragmentary memories or emotions from the victims who died to produce the drug. The production of these compounds requires vast numbers of victims, driving the Emperor's children's constant raiding for captives. A single dose might require hundreds of victims, depending on the drug's potency and the refinement process used. Major campaigns are planned not around strategic objectives, but around the need to acquire sufficient raw material for the warband's drug production. Entire worlds have been raided not for resources or territory, but simply to capture populations that can be processed into chemical enhancers. The Emperor's children's approach to melee combat combines centuries of practice with supernatural enhancements and chemical augmentation. They favor weapons that allow for artistic expression, power swords that can be wielded with finesse, whips that create elaborate patterns in combat, and paired blades that enable complex attack sequences. Each warrior develops a personal fighting style, something unique that sets them apart from their brothers and provides maximum aesthetic satisfaction. Their dueling culture has intensified over the millennia since the heresy. Warriors constantly challenge each other, not from genuine hostility, but from desire to test themselves against worthy opponents and experience the thrill of evenly matched combat. These duels are conducted with elaborate ritual, often before audiences of fellow Marines who critique the participants' technique and style. Winning matters less than fighting beautifully, with warriors praised more for elegant defeats than for crude victories. This culture produces fighters of exceptional skill. As an average Emperor's Children Marine is superior in close combat to most loyalist Space Marines simply through sheer accumulated experience. Champions like Lucius have raised melee combat to an art form that borders on the superhuman, capable of defeating entire squads of normal Marines without taking a wound. They move with speed that seems to violate physics, their enhanced reflexes and combat drugs allowing them to place attacks with millimeter precision while dodging or parrying everything directed at them. But their pursuit of sensation makes them vulnerable in ways that more disciplined forces are not. A warrior distracted by the aesthetic qualities of a particular kill might miss a more important tactical opportunity. A squad focused on coordinating their sonic weapons for maximum musical effect might fail to adapt when the tactical situation changes. An officer pursuing an artistically satisfying strategy might overlook a more practical approach that would achieve objectives more quickly. The Emperor's children's greatest strength, their obsessive focus on experience and sensation, is also their greatest weakness, creating openings that skilled opponents can exploit. The Blastmaster is a larger variant of the Sonic Blaster, capable of producing bass notes so powerful they can shatter ceramite armor and reduce buildings to rubble. The weapon operator can vary the frequency to produce different effects: a lower tone for structural damage, a higher pitch for anti-personnel work, complex harmonics to create psychic feedback that drives victims insane. And a skilled Blastmaster operator is an artist in death, crafting symphonies of destruction where every note serves both tactical and aesthetic purposes. But perhaps most disturbing are the noise marines themselves, those warriors who have been so extensively modified that they experience combat as a form of ecstasy. Their auditory organs have been enhanced or replaced with artificial systems that can process sound across frequencies far beyond human capabilities. Their brains have been rewired so that the neural pathways normally associated with pleasure are activated by sounds of destruction. For a noise marine, the roar of battle, the screams of dying enemies, the thunder of their own weapons, all of these produce intense euphoria. This creates a feedback loop that makes noise marines particularly dangerous opponents. The act of killing literally feels good to them, driving them to seek more opportunities for violence. They are addicted to war in the most literal sense, experiencing withdrawal symptoms when not actively fighting. This makes them ferocious in assault, willing to take risks that other warriors would consider suicidal because the pleasure of combat outweighs concerns about personal survival. The Emperor's children have also embraced surgical modification far beyond even the extensive augmentation of normal space marines. They graft additional limbs onto their bodies, install organs harvested from xenos or demons, replace perfectly functional body parts with enhanced versions simply to experience new sensations. Some have additional eyes implanted across their bodies to expand their visual range. Others have tactile sensors embedded in their armor so they can feel every impact, every cut, every sensation of combat. Combat drugs play a crucial role in their warfare. The Emperor's children are constantly experimenting with new chemical compounds designed to enhance sensation and push their altered bodies to new extremes. Some drugs heighten reflexes to the point where the user perceives time as moving in slow motion. Others increase pain tolerance, while simultaneously making pain pleasurable, creating warriors who fight more effectively the more damage they take. Still others enhance the user's sensory perception to supernatural levels, allowing them to track enemies by smell or feel vibrations through the ground with perfect accuracy. These drugs come at terrible cost. Many are refined from human bodies, as requiring hundreds or thousands of victims to produce a single dose. The refinement process itself is an act of deliberate cruelty, as the apothecaries believe that fear and pain improve the final product's quality. Victims are kept alive throughout the extraction process, conscious and aware of what is being done to them. The drugs created from their suffering are then used to enhance the Marines' combat effectiveness, creating a horrible cycle where suffering begets more suffering. The Emperor's children's approach to combat emphasizes speed and aggression. They strike fast, overwhelming enemy positions before effective response can be organized. Their enhanced reflexes and combat drugs make them supernaturally quick, able to close distances that should be impossible. And once in melee range, they are devastating, as centuries of practice have honed their skills to perfection, and the pleasure they derive from combat makes them fearless. They don't fight to win, they fight to experience, and death is just another sensation to be savored. Their tactical flexibility remains one of their greatest strengths. Despite 10 millennia of corruption, they retain the analytical mindset that made the original Emperor's children such effective commanders. They study their opponents, identify weaknesses, and craft plans that exploit those weaknesses with surgical precision. But unlike loyalist forces, they're willing to employ strategies that other chaos forces would consider beneath them. Psychological warfare, terror tactics, the strategic targeting of civilians to break enemy morale, all are tools in their arsenal. They have also developed expertise in using fear and sensation as weapons. Noise Marines can modulate their weapons to produce sounds that don't kill, but instead drive victims into states of panic or euphoria. Entire enemy formations can be routed without a single casualty simply by exposing them to sonic patterns that override their ability to think rationally. Other times, they broadcast recordings of previous battles, letting enemies hear the screams of those who fell to the Emperor's children, breaking their will before the fighting even begins. The Emperor's children make extensive use of demon allies, particularly demons of Slaanesh. Demonettes, with their hypnotic beauty and razor-sharp claws, fight alongside the Marines, while larger demons, like Keepers of Secrets, provide overwhelming firepower and psychic support. While the presence of these warp entities further destabilizes reality, making the battlefield itself a place of impossible sensations, where the laws of physics become flexible and unreliable. Fabius Bile, the Clone Lord. No discussion of the Emperor's children would be complete without examining Fabius Bile in detail. The former chief apothecary has become something far more terrifying than a simple mad scientist. He is an artist of flesh, a genetic architect whose creations are both marvels of biological engineering and abominations against nature itself. And critically, he has distanced himself from the Emperor's children while still providing services to various Chaos factions, making him a persistent threat across the galaxy. Bile's philosophy is surprisingly atheistic for someone dwelling in the Eye of Terror. He doesn't worship Chaos. Doesn't believe the Chaos gods are truly divine. To him, they are simply powerful warp entities, no more deserving of worship than a particularly strong storm deserves prayer. This perspective makes him unique among the traitors, a man pursuing his own vision of perfection rather than serving any dark power. But it also makes him particularly dangerous, as he has no compunctions about using Chaos's gifts when they serve his purposes, while maintaining enough distance to avoid being consumed by corruption. His ultimate goal is creating what he calls the New Men, genetically engineered humans designed to replace baseline humanity. These beings possess strength and intelligence far exceeding normal humans, along with immunity to many diseases and genetic flaws. But they also embody what Bile considers humanity's worst traits: ambition, cruelty, and the drive to dominate others. He has seeded populations of new men across dozens of worlds, hiding them among baseline humans, watching to see if they will eventually supplant the species that spawned them. Bile's creations in service to Chaos are equally impressive and horrifying. The Tirata are space marines who have been enhanced beyond even the Emperor's original design, granted additional organs, enhanced reflexes, and modified gene seed that makes them superior fighters. But these enhancements come at cost. The Tirata age rapidly, their enhanced metabolisms burning through their lives. They are loyal to Bile, not through choice, but through genetic conditioning, created to serve him without question or doubt. His gland hounds are another matter entirely. These are warriors grown from Primarch gene seed, where it's an achievement that should be impossible, given that the Emperor's original techniques for creating Primarchs have been lost for millennia. Bile has somehow replicated enough of that process to create beings who possess some fraction of Primarch capabilities. They are stronger and faster than normal space marines, more intelligent and charismatic. But they are also unstable, prone to genetic degradation and madness. Bile sees them as works in progress, experimental prototypes for the day when he can perfect the process and create true Primarchs under his control. The primogenitor, as he styles himself, has survived 10,000 years through a combination of skill and contingency planning. His original body has died multiple times, killed by enemies or simply worn out by age and injury, but Bile maintains a network of clones, as perfect copies of himself kept in stasis until needed. When his current body dies, his consciousness and memories transfer to a waiting clone, allowing him to effectively cheat death. This process has some limitations. Memories degrade with each transfer, and aspects of personality can be lost, but it has kept him alive and active when his contemporaries have long since fallen. Bile operates from a fleet of ships collectively called the Vesalius, a mobile laboratory that allows him to avoid staying in any one location too long. The Vesalius is crewed by his creations, Tirata warriors, new men servants, and countless experimental subjects in various states of modification. The ship itself is as much a work of biological art as a vessel, with organic components grown into its structure, walls that breathe and pulse, and sections that exist partially in real space and partially in the warp. His services are available to any Chaos faction willing to pay his price. Bile will enhance warriors, create specialized troops, harvest gene seed, or clone fallen champions for those who can offer him what he needs. His prices vary, but always involve either subjects for experimentation or access to rare genetic samples. He has worked for all the traitor legions at various points, creating enhanced warriors for the Black Legion, developing plague vectors for the Death Guard, crafting berserker implants for the World Eaters. He maintains no permanent loyalty, moving between clients as his interests and research needs dictate. The Imperium has attempted to kill or capture Bile countless times. Inquisitors have made his destruction a personal crusade. Our Space Marine chapters have dedicated decades to hunting him. But he always escapes, always survives, always returns to continue his work. Part of this is his own skill and intelligence. Part is the protection offered by whichever Chaos faction he's currently serving. But a significant factor is that the traitor legions need him. Without his ability to create new Space Marines from gene seed, the Long War would have ended millennia ago through simple attrition. He is perhaps the most valuable non-combatant in the Eye of Terror, and the traitors will protect him regardless of personal feelings, because losing him would be catastrophic to their cause. His relationship with the Emperor's children remains complicated. He has no love for the Legion he once served, seeing their descent into Slaanesh worship as a waste of potential. But many Emperor's children warbands still seek his services, offering him opportunities for research in exchange for his expertise. And Bile, pragmatist that he is, accepts these contracts when they serve his purposes. He may despise what his former brothers have become, but he's willing to enhance them, modify them, and create new warriors for them if doing so advances his own goals. Notable champions and warbands. The fragmented nature of the Emperor's children has produced numerous warbands, each with its own character and methods. Some are small raiding parties, others are substantial forces capable of conquering entire worlds. A few of the most notable examples illustrate the diversity and danger these groups represent. Lucius the Eternal is perhaps the most famous individual warrior among the Emperor's children. Once a captain in the Legion, Lucius was always a supremely skilled duelist, potentially the finest swordsman the Emperor's children produced. But he was also vain and jealous, unable to accept that anyone might be his equal in combat. This pride led him to betray his brothers on Istvan III, and it has since led him to become Slaanesh's chosen champion. Lucius's defining curse is his inability to remain dead. When someone kills him in combat, if they feel even the slightest pride in their achievement, their soul becomes claimed by Slaanesh. Their body transforms into Lucius's form, with the killer's face appearing somewhere on the reborn champion's armor as a screaming visage. This has happened thousands of times over 10 millennia. Lucius has been killed by Imperial heroes, by other Chaos champions, by Xenos warriors, and even by anonymous soldiers who happened to land a lucky shot. But if they felt any satisfaction at defeating him, they became him, adding another face to the collection adorning his armor. This curse makes Lucius effectively immortal, but it has also driven him increasingly insane. He remembers each death, experiences each resurrection, and knows that he cannot truly lose. Combat has become a performance for him, a theatrical display where the outcome is predetermined. He seeks ever more challenging opponents, hoping to find someone whose death will actually matter, but knowing that ultimately he will simply add another face to his armor. The only real question is how long it will take. Lord Commander Eidolon represents a different aspect of the Emperor's children's corruption. He was among the first to receive Fabius Bile's enhancements, as gaining the ability to produce devastating sonic screams. This modification, combined with his own considerable tactical skill, made him one of the Legion's most effective commanders during the heresy. He died during the Siege of Terror, torn apart by loyalist defenders. But death was not the end for Eidolon. Fabius Bile brought Eidolon back from death, reconstructing him from what remained and infusing his corpse with warp energies. The resurrected Eidolon is more demon than man, sustained by Slanesh's power and driven by hungers that transcend anything mortal. He leads one of the largest Emperor's Children warbands in the current era, commanding thousands of Marines and countless mortal followers. His strategic acumen remains intact, but it is now devoted entirely to Slanesh's glory and his own pursuit of sensation. The Cacophony Temple of the Unsated Shriek is a warband dedicated entirely to the perfection of sonic warfare. They see combat as a form of music, with every weapon discharge, every scream, every explosion contributing to a grand symphony of destruction. Their warriors spend years training not just in combat, but in music theory and acoustics, learning to coordinate their attacks to create specific harmonies and resonances. In battle, they fight with terrifying synchronization, their sonic weapons creating waves of destruction that build on each other, amplifying and reinforcing until entire enemy formations simply dissolve under the psychosonic assault. The Flawless Host warband maintains elements of the Emperor's Children's original aesthetic obsession. They paint their armor in elaborate patterns, craft their weapons as works of art, and choreograph their battles like performances. But their definition of beauty has become twisted beyond recognition. They find aesthetic pleasure in suffering and death, seeing the pattern of blood spray as art, hearing music in dying screams. They have transformed the Legion's original pursuit of perfection into something nightmarish, where beauty and horror have become indistinguishable. Countless smaller warbands exist, each pursuing its own vision of what the Emperor's Children should be. Some focus entirely on raiding for slaves and resources. Others seek specific artifacts or knowledge. Some follow their own personal quests for transcendence through sensation. The fragmentation that destroyed the Legion as a unified force has created hundreds of smaller threats, each dangerous in its own way, and each pursuing its own twisted vision of perfection. The greater threat. What makes the Emperor's Children particularly dangerous is not just their individual prowess, but what they represent. They are proof that even the most loyal, the most perfect, the most dedicated can fall to chaos if they lose sight of their fundamental purpose. The Third Legion was granted honors beyond any other. They bore the Emperor's own symbol, represented his will directly, were entrusted with diplomatic missions that required both martial skill and cultural sophistication. And they fell further than any other legion, save perhaps the word-bearers. Their corruption was not quick or obvious. It was gradual, seductive, a slow erosion of principles that went unnoticed until it was too late to reverse. They didn't wake up one day and decide to betray the Emperor. They convinced themselves that each compromise, each crossing of boundaries, each embrace of forbidden knowledge was justified in pursuit of the greater goal of perfection. By the time they realized what they had become, they were too far gone to turn back. This makes them particularly insidious in the current era. Other chaos forces are obvious threats. The World Eaters attack with berserk fury. The Death Guard brings plague and decay. The Thousand Suns wield obvious sorcery. But the Emperor's Children can appear almost reasonable at first contact. They speak of excellence and perfection, ideals that any imperial citizen can relate to. They demonstrate sophistication and culture, seeming civilized compared to other chaos forces. It's only when their victims are committed, when retreat is impossible, that the full horror of what the Emperor's Children have become is revealed. They target not just military objectives, but the cultural and artistic centers of the Imperium. They raid paradise worlds where humanity has created something beautiful, not to destroy it, but to corrupt it, to show that even the Imperium's finest achievements are inferior to what chaos offers. They abduct artists, musicians, and philosophers, subjecting them to experiences that either break them or transform them into willing servants. They undermine faith in the imperial system by demonstrating that perfection as the Imperium defines it is an illusion, that true transcendence requires embracing sensation without limit. The psychological damage they inflict often exceeds the physical destruction. Survivors of Emperor's Children raids are frequently left insane, their minds unable to process what they experienced. Even when memory is suppressed or erased, the trauma remains, manifesting in nightmares and psychological breaks. Worlds that have been touched by the Emperor's children never fully recover. The taint lingers, reality remaining slightly unstable, with citizens more prone to excess and hedonism, more vulnerable to Slaaneish's influence in future. And in the current era, with the Great Rift splitting the galaxy, the Emperor's children are more active than ever. They raid with impunity across the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy cut off from Terra's light. They have established strongholds on demon worlds and corrupted imperial planets, creating bases from which they launch ever more ambitious attacks. Reports reach Terra of entire sectors falling to Slaaneshi corruption, and of imperial governors who welcome the Emperor's children as liberators, of populations that willingly submit to experiences that would have horrified them mere months earlier. Fulgrim's increased activity suggests something even more troubling. The demon Primarch appears to be gathering his scattered sons, not to reform the Legion as it was, but to create something new and perhaps even more dangerous. Warbands that have fought independently for millennia are coordinating their activities. Joint operations between previously rival groups are becoming more common. Some fear that Fulgrim is preparing for a new Black Crusade, a focused assault on the Imperium that could make Abaddon's efforts look modest by comparison. The Imperium's response to this threat has been complicated by the Emperor's children's fragmented nature, where destroying one warband accomplishes little when hundreds of others remain. Even killing a major champion like Lucius only temporarily removes him from the board. And every victory against the Emperor's children comes at terrible cost, as fighting them requires exposure to their corruption, to their weapons and their methods. Too many victories, and the victors risk becoming as corrupted as those they defeated. Conclusion: the price of perfection. The story of the Emperor's children is ultimately a tragedy, though one entirely of their own making. They were given everything: honor, recognition, the Emperor's personal favor. They achieved greatness through discipline and dedication, becoming exemplars of what Space Marines could accomplish. They had every advantage, every opportunity to remain loyal and true to their oaths. But they wanted more. Perfection was not enough. They needed to exceed perfection, to transcend it, to achieve something beyond what the Emperor himself had envisioned. This ambition, noble in concept, became their damnation. They looked at the Emperor's masterwork, the creation of the Primarchs and Space Marines, and declared it incomplete. They saw his restrictions on genetic experimentation and use of warp power as limitations rather than safeguards. They mistook caution for timidity and forbidden knowledge for opportunity. The path from the Emperor's children, as they once were, to what they became was not inevitable. There were warning signs, moments when different choices could have been made. When Fulgrim found the demon blade, he could have destroyed it or sealed it away. When Fabius proposed his experiments, Fulgrim could have refused permission or insisted on more safeguards. When Eldrad tried to warn them of Horus's corruption, they could have listened instead of attacking. Each decision point offered an opportunity to turn back, to reject corruption, to remain loyal. Each time they chose the path that led deeper into darkness. Now they are beyond redemption. The Emperor's children who exist today bear little resemblance to the noble warriors who once earned the right to wear the Palatine Aquila. They are monsters wearing the skins of heroes, using the name Emperor's Children as mockery rather than honor. They have become everything their predecessors would have despised: undisciplined, hedonistic, devoted to excess rather than excellence. The pursuit of perfection has become pursuit of sensation. As the drive for improvement has become addiction to experience, the desire to exceed limits has become rejection of all boundaries. Yet they remain dangerous precisely because they retain fragments of their original capabilities. They are still brilliant tacticians when they choose to focus. They still possess the cultural sophistication that once made them effective diplomats and ambassadors. They still understand how to coordinate diverse forces to achieve objectives. These capabilities, combined with their corruption and access to chaos power, make them perhaps the most insidious threat the Imperium faces. They prove that loyalty alone is not enough, that even the best can fall if they lose sight of why they fight. The lesson of the Emperor's children should be burned into every Imperial citizen's heart, and that the pursuit of excellence is noble, but it must be tempered with humility and awareness of one's limitations. Perfection is a worthy goal, but claiming to have achieved it is arrogance that invites corruption. And any philosophy, no matter how noble its beginning, can be twisted into justification for the worst acts if taken to extremes without moral grounding. In the grim darkness of the far future, the Emperor's children stand as monument to fallen greatness, as warning of corruption's subtle path, and as threat that can never be truly eliminated. They were once the best humanity could produce. Now, they are among the worst nightmares it faces. And the most terrifying aspect of their story is how easily it could have been prevented, as if only they had been content with the perfection they had already achieved, rather than seeking to exceed it. The Third Legion fell because they wanted to be perfect. In seeking perfection beyond what was possible or advisable, they became the perfect expression of corruption, the ideal servants of the Dark Prince of Pleasure. And in the millennia since their fall, they have shown the galaxy again and again that there are indeed fates worse than death, and that the pursuit of perfection without wisdom leads only to damnation. If you've made it this far through this deep dive into the Emperor's children, their history, their fall, and the nightmare they've become, I appreciate you taking this journey with me through one of Warhammer 40k's darkest tales. But the transformation from noble warriors to corrupted monsters serves as one of the setting's most powerful cautionary tales. If you enjoyed this exploration of the Third Legion's corruption, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories to tell from the grim darkness of the far future, and your support helps make these deep dives possible. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the pursuit of perfection, beware that you don't lose what made you human in the first place.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.